Welcome back to Cards and Comics, coming live to you from Leibach, Germany, where I am visiting some colleagues. I'm at a quality conference, doing some quality stuff, some food safety stuff. Now, been traveling a lot, not a lot of videos coming out immediately. I'm sorry about that. It's just been hard to do things when you're up in the air, but I want to make this video because I really want to talk about this topic. And I want to focus on 2 points because there's been thousands of memes and videos about this topic already. So my 2 points are going to be is, what does harmonization across these two brands mean for collectors, and what I think that makes sense for collectors, PSA, and SGC going forward. Secondly is, how can PSA or collectors do one thing that's going to immediately impact the value and collectability of SGC cards. So, let's get on the idea that this topic has been covered pretty well, right? You're seeing all these videos about SGC being, purchased. Some people took it better than others. Other people didn't, right? And then here's kind of the press release about this, right, from SGC's point of view. So going to what I want to talk about here with is this idea of harmonization, right? So going back to what this is, you've got two brands. You got PSA and SGC. These brands provide a service, right? The service is authentication and grading of cards, right? That's what they do. Now, for as long as these two brands have been around, it's been advertised by both brands that their experience, your experience with each brand is going to be different, and the service is different. The grading standards aren't the same. Even the grading scales aren't the same. And in fact, from the early times of SGC, when they didn't have the 10-point scale, they had the 100-point scale. It was truly two different scales and services, right? And over the years, they have harmonized a little bit closer with a 10-point scale, but SGC still has that gold 10, kind of like their 11, their black, label version of their 10. Or their pristine 10, they got that, higher than high grade, whereas PSA still doesn't have anything between that 9 and 10, right? You still don't have a PSA 9.5. We still don't have an SGC or a PSA pristine or 11 or whatever you want to talk about, right? So PSA and SGC scales aren't the same. So that's the one thing, is they haven't harmonized that. Could that be on the table? Could a harmonization between scales be in the works? That's going to lead to my next point. But talking about other ways to harmonize the two brands, because we have to really look at this as far as what it means to collectors. I do think that one of the main reasons that PSA and collectors bought SGC was for resources, that they want to grow the PSA brand faster. They want more cards and turnaround time to increase through the PSA grading platform. They feel like, in my opinion, that the quickest way to get graders that are experienced and trustworthy is to buy a competitor like SGC and have them also grade PSA cards. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that now the two services are exactly the same? In some ways, yes. If you can use an SGC grader to grade a PSA card and vice versa, is there really two different services anymore? Or are you just paying for a different color holder? Now, I do think that could be the final version of this, where all you're really selecting when you say I want a PSA versus SGC card is that you have a different holder and maybe a different scale, right? Now, if they fix the scale issue, that could mean you basically are just saying I want the PSA holder or I want the SGC holder. Now, in today's environment, that is pretty different in a lot of ways. One is obviously there is a difference between PSA and SGC values, right? Now, if they're both graded by the same people, should there be that big of a value difference, right? Because really you're just buying a different color holder. If you think that the grading is done by the same people, meaning that they have the same, ability, the same, standards. That is not what SGC puts in their statement here. That they're independent. They're going to be, utilizing the same, techniques as they did before. I just don't believe long term that this is what's going to happen. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year. But I think actually using the same graders or using graders to help get PSA caught up and improve their turnaround times and customer service is a big part of why SGC was purchased to begin with, because that's the one thing that SGC has that really PSA has struggled with, which is turnaround time, customer service. Now, I think also the holder, is a big deal for a lot of people. A lot of people like the tuxedo. I've gone on my channel many times and talked about how I think the tuxedo holder for certain types of cards is a negative because it damages the cards. But in general, there is two different looks, and some people like look A, some people like look B. But the big thing that could happen is if PSA does the one thing that SGC never did, which is allow cards from SGC to be entered into their registry, right? That's the big bombshell. That's the one thing that will make SGC cards become, tremendously more collectible. And in my opinion, the value go up if you can do a, PSA registry or a registry that contains both cards and you get the points counted in a certain way. If it's the same, that means that SGC cards are going to be counted the same as a PSA card in the registry. That's huge. Now, do I think they're going to do that right off the bat? I don't think they are. I think everyone expects that PSA is going to create a SGC only registry and a PSA only registry. And they might. I think they'll also do a hybrid where you can have both. The one thing they could do to make, again, SGC cards worth a heck of a lot more money today than what they are, is if they just make one registry that you can use both cards in. If they do that, where there's only one registry, you will see a tremendous spike in the buying of SGC cards for the registry sets, the registration of cards from SGC collectors into the registry. I have many sets that I've worked on that have both SGC and PSA cards, including my Hank Aaron and Willie Mays set, that I would take advantage of that. I would want to have a registry with those cards, all those PSA and SGC cards in it. The proof or the issue is how would they, deal with that? Because the grading scales aren't the same. What do you do with an SGC 9.5? What do you do with an SGC Pristine? Do you give it more points than what PSA cards are? And does that mean that someone who has the number one registry set for PSA, all of a sudden, someone enters in a bunch of SGC 9.5s and now has the highest GPA for that set? That's a very interesting question. I think there's a way to do it that makes one set, but it will penalize SGC cards. It'll make 9.5s, be 9s. You won't get a premium for the 10 pristine. Yeah, and that's, hey, I know SGC people would say that's terrible. Like that's going to hurt the value of those SGC cards. And I sort of agree with that, but I also think maybe PSA can make a 9.5 at this point. And that way it wouldn't be quite as, different. I don't know. There's a lot of things to work out there. But allowing SGC cards to be in the PSA registry set is the number one idea to me. If I was going to grow the SGC brand, make it more collectible instantly more collectible, and have PSA guys who only buy PSA cards because they're registry now look over the shoulder and say, I can buy some SGC cards, maybe save a little money and get the same GPA. That's an interesting play. That's something I'm going to consider. Maybe I can grade with SGC. Maybe I like the holders better, but I got my big PSA registries and I just don't want to mess with it, right? That is a consideration that a lot of collectors have. It's not something that's made up. There are collectors out there who buy PSA because of registries. They buy PSA because they want the same look across the board, right? But, that GPA matters to them a lot. And maybe this is something that will help them, take a swing at some SGC cards. Maybe they'll like them. And then, over time, those SGC cards could be worth more money, right? You have this kind of harmonization, this kind of blending of both of those brands into one, to where eventually it could just be I'm selecting the holder, right? I'm using the same graders. I get to put them in the same registry. There's not a lot of difference between the two services. So really, I just like the look of one over the other, but I'm not going to get penalized too much in the registry if they do it right. So the proof in that pudding, how are you going to do the registry with both brands, considering they don't have the same scale? That's tough. That's a tough nut to crack because either you're going to penalize SGC grades or you're going to penalize the PSA loyalist, who don't have some of those I call them like, those high-end tiers that don't exist in PSA. It's a really interesting quandary. I think it's something that's going to take them a while to figure out. But to me, that is, for me, a great solution because I collect both. I have both brands, both, companies' cards in my collection, and I would love to have one registry with both. And again, it could be that hybrid. You have a PSA registry, an SGC registry, and a hybrid registry where they do some mathematical calculations and make it all make sense. It could be that. But again, if they wanted to just do one registry, that would be the best way to grow SGC's brand. But penalizing the PSA people too much, I think, would probably not be what they want to do. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But it's very intriguing. But the one thing I thought about when I was kind of thinking about this video was, are we just buying two different holders at the end of the day? And 2 or 3 years from now, are we just going to be like on a form, collectors grading form? It's not even a different form. It just says like, collectors, grading submission form, and then you select what service you want. Customize holders. I mean, it could be completely different, right? It could be just like, I want the PSA holder, I want the SGC holder, I want an SGC holder with a yellow insert, whatever you do, right? I mean, this could be a completely different thing in 2 or 3 years. Who knows? It's an interesting thing for them to do. I don't think they're going to kill the SGC brand. I don't think the SGC holders are going away. I think there's going to be a registry play at some point, either one registry to rule them all or some multiple registries, but it's going to happen. So I think in all, this is positive in just overall from the hobby perspective because they're not killing a brand. They're giving collectors some choice. They could do some things to grow, both brands faster. And if the turnaround time on PSA gets better and the grading gets more consistent, that's a win as well. Remains to see if all those things happen, but that's my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you next time on Cards and Comics. Bye.